Now, the capital will tomorrow become the world's largest pollution charging area when ULEZ expands to outer London.
And this morning, more noisy protests in South London against the expansion. A Labour frontbencher saying that Sadiq Khan must reflect if it is the right time to be going ahead, warning it could hit households with one expense too many.
Motoring journalist John Marcar joins us now. John, what are your immediate thoughts then as the clock ticks down as to how fair this is?
It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? It's one that's been going on now for a good few years since we saw the first part of the ULEZ happening in central London and then, of course, the expansion going out. And I think it's a difficult one. As a motoring journalist, I have to kind of sit on the fence a little bit. I am a Londoner. I was born and brought up in southwest London and spent most of my life there. And also as a child had chronic asthma. So for me, the importance of clean air in our city is a very big one. However, I think the approach and perhaps the timing of ULEZ and its expansion hasn't fully been thought out. And I think, as you quite rightly said there are a very large number of people in the capital now who have got just another unnecessary expense added to them. And that's not to mention then the added stress on small businesses, on the high streets that are already having a really tough time. I just think whilst the sentiment is good, the timing of it is not very good.
And when you say large number, are we aware yet of the figures of those who, for instance, have gone for the scrappage scheme and have got the money, or indeed have cars that maybe are compliant?
Well, again, this is where things get really, really interesting because there are variable stats with regards to who's going to be facing charges, who's not. There are some people saying certain models of car are compliant and others aren't. There are other arguments, including the fact, believe it or not, that if you've got a newer car that is compliant in the ULEZ zones, if you then put a personalised registration plate on your car, then the ANPR, the automatic number plate recognition cameras, may not be able to decipher if that number plate is registered to a car that's compliant. So there are lots of things that people need to check. But the scrappage scheme that you mentioned there, that's a really interesting one as well, because it's been offered primarily to people that are receiving benefits from the state. But ultimately, the figure that's being offered, which is something around £2,000, just doesn't even come close to covering the costs of buying a new car. For a lot of people, they've got cars that work perfectly well, they're perfectly economical, they've had them for many, many years, they've maintained them, they've serviced them, they've kept them on the road, they've kept them roadworthy, and then all of a sudden, overnight, they're not going to be roadworthy, unless, of course, you pay the fee of £12.50. And this is, again, where things get really, really confusing. So if you've got one of these cars, you've spent an absolute fortune on buying it in the first place and keeping it roadworthy, you've then got an incentive of £2,000 to get rid of that car. Now, £2,000 is not going to even come close to covering the costs of going out and buying a replacement vehicle.
Now, we've got the bizarre situation. If you then buy a classic car pre-1983 that could be spewing all sorts of stuff out with no sort of catalytic converters or whatever, then you don't pay the ULEZ charge. It's balmy, it seems.
It's very, very odd. I mean, the logic in the classic car argument is that, of course, by driving a classic car, you're keeping a car on the road that's been on the road for many years. The carbon dioxide expenditure that's gone into making that car happened way back, decades ago. And therefore, only running that car in an ideal scenario once or twice a month. It might be your weekend car. It might be something you save for a special occasion. The bigger picture of that car is ultimately better for the environment, believe it or not, than the cars that are going out onto the road, been built in the last 5 years, have spent vastly more in terms of carbon dioxide in being created than classic cars have been. So that one is a bit of an interesting one. It is certainly one that's triggering a few conversations and debates. But often as well, the thing that I've noticed is there's a very particular age gap of cars where perhaps we're being told that car, if it's over 16 years old, is not ULEZ compliant, therefore you will have to pay. But you are able, a lot of motorists have been finding, by doing a little bit of extra research, they've been discovering that actually their cars are compliant, and a lot of motor manufacturers are able to issue a bit of paperwork that will say, actually, our cars do fall within the category that are compliant with ULEZ requirements, and therefore it's actually exempt. So it's worth everybody just double-checking, do your research, have a look online, have a look if there are forums or perhaps social media groups that might have shed the light on your particular type of vehicle. And if in doubt, do the research. And it is worth doing that because a lot of people will be paying unnecessarily.
It sounds an absolute minefield, John. Yeah. And very briefly, for people who are resigned to having to change their cars, or more importantly, can actually afford to do so, is there quite a good choice of cars on the market at a budget cost for them?
There are plenty of cars on the market and there is a very wide choice. The cost, though, that's where it's going to become difficult. There are going to be a large number of people out there that will be able to go out and just buy themselves a new car. Problem solved. But there are going to be far more that simply can't. And those are the people that this is going to hurt the most.